Welcome to the Veritas podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Alex Kaschuta. Alex is a writer, podcaster, and commentator focused on culture, dating, relationships, psychology, politics, where they intersect, all of these very interesting things that you all know I like to talk about. So I'm very excited to be speaking with Alex today. Alex, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's very good to be having you. I want to just sort of get us started as I typically would with just sort of a brief intro of who you are. I think it's good for the audience to get a general idea of who it is they're listening to exactly. I bet that at least a few of my listeners are familiar with your stuff or follow you on Twitter. I know that I discovered you on Twitter personally, but if you can just let people know who maybe aren't as familiar, who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Yeah, it's a long story, but also kind of short in terms of me having a career as a cultural commentator and podcaster. This is fairly recent, and it is tied into Twitter, as you well you well noticed. I probably went on to Twitter maybe in August September last year, and it's been quite a I don't know successful slash obsessive quest to tweet incessantly and kind of my podcast spun out of that as well. But my background is in economics, so I'm an economist by training, and I've worked in tech and finance for probably like the last 6 or 7 years continuously. And I also used to be a journalist, so I used to have like a column in Vice magazine. Don't judge me. Uh,
No
in
judgment.
in my kind of new atheist debunking
Okay, we have
times.
that in
Yeah,
common. I was a new atheist as well. Believe me, no judgment here.
it's a phase. Everyone has to go through the midwit
I call it
channel
the
to get to
edgy
the other
middle
side.
school debate me atheist phase. I definitely had it myself.
Yeah, especially here in Romania, like there literally were maybe like 10 people on the internet who were in like a weird forum that were interested in stuff like this. And I found them and I was like, oh my God, we're the only 10 people who know what's actually going on.
Yeah.
so, yeah, so that's forum lurker, meme maker, shit poster. That was also part of my history. And now I have a Substack as well. I write for a few publications, I've written for the New York Post. I have a lot of backlog that I need to send in,
Hmm.
but I will be writing for more publications soon. So yeah, it's kind of cultural commentary and parallel to journalism. It's mostly opinion journalism. My research skills are not the deepest, and my reporting skills not the deepest, but my opinionating skills are quite advanced. So I emit opinions all day. That's my that's my main quality.
Well, we definitely have something in common there. I want to ask specifically a lot of the topics you've covered, I noticed definitely on your podcast, on Twitter, have to do with kind of dating relationships between men and women. What has you so interested in that topic in particular? That's kind of what I'm going to mostly focus on today, because it's something I haven't gotten a ton of chances to actually speak about on the show. But what's kind of piqued your interest in that area?
Of total dysfunction and collapse in the wider world. Yeah, it's one of those undeniable aspects of modernity that something's going off the rails in a very deep way. And I mean, I used to live in London until fairly recently, until last year, and that's kind of you're very close to the pulse of it. All of my girlfriends were trying to date. Some of them were trying to get married. I had also some male friends trying to just make heads or tails of what was going on, and it was really hard. So there was quite a disconnect there, and I was trying to figure out, okay, why is this happening? And in a way, this ties into a lot of the political things that I talk about as
Right.
well. So it's all kind of upstream, downstream. They all kind of influence each other. All of these emergent phenomena. And I think the problem is at its core of a rejection of nature. It's forgetting about really basic stuff that everyone knew until maybe a generation ago, and now we kind of have to reinvent the wheel, both in terms of how we deal with each other, both between the sexes or at work, or just simple morality. People are trying every day, waking up like, how should I be? How should I exist? There are some people have thought about this in the past a little bit, and maybe we wanna draw on their wisdom. But yeah, essentially that, I think dating is kind of a microcosm of all of these changes that have happened quite fast to almost all of humanity. Because I live in Romania now, but it's we're not spared here. We're not, maybe a few years behind, but not that much.
It's sort of like the culture is exported from the United States. I've noticed that even with things like Black Lives Matter, which were very exclusive to the United States at one point, they always kind of get exported to Europe and elsewhere. You mentioned I'm going to stick with the notion you mentioned of sort of rejecting nature with my first big question to you as it pertains to the topic of this conflict that particularly women have faced in the past like 40, 50 years, also men to some extent, but particularly women. And that's a conflict between the innate desire that most or perhaps almost all women have to have children, to have families. And this conflict there is now is sort of climbing the corporate ladder, which is a relatively new concept, especially for women who have only really been in the corporate space for maybe 40, 50 years. What do you make of this conflict in the West and kind of its impact and how it's kind of come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's very deeply embedded now into the spirit of what it means to be, especially a young person in the West, a kind of this genderless young person that we're all kind of propagandized to be from television. And I understand, because on the one hand, being a woman in a traditional sense means being kind of chained to your nature. It's that almost that weird trope of barefoot and pregnant. And in a way, yeah, I mean, you can wear shoes while being pregnant, but pregnancy really is. I'm now 8.5 months pregnant, so it does kind of.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thanks for being on the show. That's quite a feat.
No, it's all good. No worries. And it does kind of, it constrains your freedom. It's a hard slog at one point. And I understand why, if the person that you value most in society, like the kind of the apex individual, is this kind of rational agent individual that has the most degrees of freedom, has the most options, has the most capacity to participate in the things that are status enhancing. And in this case, it's probably gainful employment or some sort of lawyer doctor type high status job. If you are pregnant, it doesn't work very easily. It really is, and after you're pregnant, you have a baby, and the baby is very much dependent on you. So I understand kind of why in the run up to the 1960s, women kind of wanted to opt out of this. And then the birth control pill actually allowed it, because, all of the feminist philosophy is one thing, technology is another, and I think technology participated in this scheme much more profoundly than any of the theoreticians that invented the descriptions of what happened after the birth control pill. So I think that's kind of the core idea is, you have to be this individual, you have to participate in these hierarchies, and we are indistinguishable. So women kind of melt into this kind of neoliberal individual that has to participate. So I think that's kind of the core of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you mentioned kind of this propaganda thing that happened, like the messaging that is really beamed into women's brains and also to some extent men, and in many different ways, from the media, from our political establishment. It seems like there's kind of this concerted effort to sort of, I think, say these conflicting messages. On one hand, I think there's some vestigial appreciation of motherhood, except that it's sort of expressed as an extension of feminism. Often it's like it's about how you will raise your son or daughter in a feminist way. In the West, that is often how it's kind of venerated, or it's kind of put into the girl boss box of being a mother makes you a girl
Yeah.
boss. It's not really about the innate care and nurturing and the incredible power that motherhood is in raising children. And then you're really encouraged to climb that corporate ladder. And you're also told that you don't have to make any kind of choice. You're basically told, no woman should ever have to choose between any two things. You can absolutely have it all, no matter what you want to do. And, you mentioned how it is a challenge. Certainly it's possible to have children and have a great career, but it is a challenge. And would seem to me, I mean, I'm not a woman, but when I think about what women are hearing from society, I feel like it would create a sort of cognitive dissonance, especially as it pertains to their nature and as it pertains to these messages, which just don't really jive with each other and don't make a whole lot of sense. And yet they're constantly berated with them.
Yeah, it's it is tricky, especially when you realize that not everyone can have a career. You know, a career is a very rare thing in the sense of, you know, this is the thing that's going to fulfill me. I can do this my whole life. This is the pinnacle of my existence. There are some people who feel that way, and some of those people are women. Not most of those people. Most people in general have jobs, and you know they go to a 9 to 5, or you know a 9 to 11 sometimes in these very high pressure jobs.
Yeah.
And you know there's a lot of responsibility, and a lot of the times you know women kind of realize that you know you go through a few of these strata, you get a few promotions, and at the end of every promotions there's a little bit more money, a lot more responsibility. You know you get home later. Yeah, it's not, you know, the horizon's always receding, and your biological clock is also not really playing any games, which is also something that a lot of people find out very late. And I think that this is kind of I think now there's more conversation, maybe. I'm also in an echo chamber where people actually do talk about this stuff a lot. So I talk about this stuff a lot. But if you just, you know, watch mainstream media, if you just watch shows directed at women in their like late 20s, early 30s, it's all about, you know, independence and, you know, kicking ass and taking names, making your name out in the world, and having these you know, steamy liaisons with, you know, men in suits, and you know, them having them pine after you, which is not really how it plays out in outside of the, you know, the movie studio, unfortunately.
A lot of spreadsheets.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of PowerPoint presentation, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of, you know, late night, you know, texting
Oh
where
yeah.
your boss is a little bit angry, and then you're like, is he really angry? Like, I don't know, we'll have to see tomorrow, and then you can't sleep, and it's, you know, there's a lot of, you know, pressure accumulating there, and the payoff at the end of the rainbow is like, I don't know, a bit more money, a bit more consumption opportunities. You can take one extra vacation, or maybe a more fancy vacation at the end of the year. I don't know exactly where does it end. And to me as well, it was kind of like this, because I was also kind of bred to be one of these foot soldiers of the
Mm.
market. You know, I've kind of economics major. I went to kind of one of these schools that, you know, everyone went to McKinsey afterwards, or Bain, or some form of consulting. So it was pretty clear what I was set up to do. But you know, after a while, maybe I'm just lazy or something. But I was like, okay, this whole system, I don't think, you know, it's a bit of a pyramid scheme, you know. And
Mm.
I'm also, you know, aware of my biology. Like this is not a very good a good combination that I'm in. And also, you know, I was seeing a lot of women kind of fall for this trap, and I was like, okay, you know, this is something people need to talk about, and started talking about it on the internet, because I couldn't really tell this to, you know, to my friends' faces, because it was kind of like, okay, your whole life wrong, don't do this anymore. You need to change course, you know, get married, or you know, find a husband, find a long-term partner, and you know, plant an herb garden somewhere. It's very hard to talk about this in very stark terms, because yeah, there's also the issue of, you know, female communication styles. You have to be a bit more, you know, you have to suggest things rather than say them, you know, to people's faces. So
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's, as with unfortunately pretty much everything nowadays, there's a great taboo to make of it. I mean, there's sort of an orthodoxy surrounding it. There's, you know, the orthodoxy line is basically that, you know, women should empower themselves as individuals via, you know, career, via the corporate ladder, and that this will lead them to incredible wealth and prosperity and happiness and power. And the motherhood is sort of like secondary to that. And it's strikes me as odd, sort of as we were alluding to, because as you mentioned, and as I was kind of joking about the spreadsheet comment, work is a slog. I mean, like work is as school is often portrayed in cartoons and in TV, and as we all know from life, it often just sucks. I mean, it's called work for a reason, and there's a reason why people have to get paid tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to get up at
Yeah.
9 a.m. every day and do it because it's work. And motherhood is this natural sort of innate desire, and also, obviously to maybe a slightly lesser extent, fatherhood for men. Um, and it's, I mean, I know motherhood is not always pleasant. I remember being kind of a tough kid to raise for my mom, but when I think about the comparison between the two, it does strike me as odd that so many more women, especially in my age bracket, I'm 26, so I'm generally around women that are in their mid 20s. So many women cannot imagine choosing motherhood and sticking with it and not, you know, obsessing over their career. And then I think about it and I'm like, I mean, honestly, I've even considered how nice it would be to be a stay-at-home dad. It just seems like a much more rewarding thing on paper if I even think about it for like 2 seconds. And yet the messaging is the complete inversion of that. And as you mentioned, there are some men and some women for whom definitely having kids maybe isn't the best idea, but it's a much smaller minority, especially of women. And this is something that I think Jordan Peterson kind of got out there. And of course, he got a lot of flack for. It's a very small minority of men, and then even smaller for women, who really, truly are better off in the long term not having kids at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's tied to this, almost like hegemonic view of what it is to be a person nowadays. And it is to be an individual. And, the individual woman versus the individual man are often at odds. And if you look at, all of media and how all of these representations of marriage, like, I don't know, when was the last positive representation of marriage that you've seen in media? Like, what is there to look forward to? It's all these, slobby, idiotic men, even in sitcoms. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the woman is hot and could leave him at any time. He's a bit of a bumbling idiot, but he's kind of lovable. They stay together. Why? We don't know. It's all kind of a bit, set up to be like, oh, the woman's actually just putting up with this idiot. So it's, I understand why there is fear, because there are situations where, there's domestic violence, and we've seen many movies about domestic violence, obviously. There is, financial dependence between women and men, and especially in a situation where they really don't get along, and there's a tension where maybe he's aggressive or things like that, or he really is an asshole, which happens. But it's not like a stereotypical case. I would understand why women would want, financial independence, but there's a difference between, having skills that are marketable and orienting your entire existence towards a career where you have to move up the ladder, and this is it, this is your life. So I feel like, people have kind of overshot the mark here, and have also, focused very much on the idea of, okay, I have to develop myself as this individual, perfect individual, making choices, kicking ass, taking names, and then as an option to add to my portfolio of things that enrich my life as an individual, I can maybe get married. I can maybe additionally take on a child, which I will mold in my own.
And I can post pictures of them on Facebook, and it becomes part of my public persona as well. That's,
Exactly. It's a facet of me, of the complex, a kaleidoscope that I've built throughout my life as an individual, which is a perspective that I think is completely, foreign to someone like, I don't know, my grandma. I keep thinking about my grandparents, because, they were like, I think the second generation of people who actually wore like solid sole shoes, like their great grandparents were serfs. Like, this is,
yeah.
yeah, not, it was all about family. It was all about community. And it made sense back then because they really needed each other. There was no DoorDash. There was no, Uber Eats did not knock on your door and give you, unintermediated deliveries and things like that. Family was necessary for survival. And now that it isn't, I mean, it also kind of makes sense that it's kind of slowly dissolving. But it might be necessary for other things that might not be that obvious, might necessarily for mental health to not just be like a hikikomori, staying at home person, just, on your computer and ordering everything in alone.
Yeah, I love this point that you make about how things have changed and sort of maybe some of the things that led to this sort of family collapse that we've been seeing and declining birth rates, marriage rates, which I think it's no wonder when you mention the pop culture thing, because I definitely remember seeing that growing up, this idea that marriage is a slog. In marriage, you will never have sex, or it will be very difficult to do so. It's sort of like the butt of a lot of jokes. That's the sex is either awful or not happening at all. All sorts of things that when I was a kid, I grew up thinking like, oh, marriage is miserable. And my parents also happened to get divorced. It was not the ugliest divorce in the world. It's not the prettiest divorce in the world. So my general understanding of marriage was that it's kind of a slog. I'm happy to say I'm in a great relationship right now. I've been in a relationship for 3 years. My girlfriend's in the other room. But I wanted to ask you about sort of the notion you were referring to in terms of how things have changed over time, because I think this is a really important aspect of what has led to the sort of collapse of the family and the idea of commitment and family becoming much less popular and much less interesting to people, which is not only did you need it to keep society together and to keep people together and to support each other, to have that kind of glue just for the sake of survival. I mean, until just 200 years ago, the first thing every human being thought about when they got up in the morning is how am I going to survive today? Because they could die from getting a paper cut. The other thing I think of is just occupation and boredom. I mean, 200 years ago, what were you going to do with your day? Maybe you could read a book, maybe if you had access to literature, maybe. But beyond that, yeah, I understand people 200 years ago, the idea of recreation was not completely foreign to them, but for the most part, they had survival and family, and maybe they had a trade if they were lucky. And there just weren't that many distractions, right? There wasn't that much else to do with your time, especially over the course of several years, several decades. Now there's video games, there's pornography, there's movies, there's comic books, there's all these little hobbying things, there's politics, and people have sure gotten into politics over the course of the last few years. There are so many other ways to kind of fill your soul that in the long term, I think we're just starting to find out don't work very well because the internet is relatively young. And I think we're just waking up to how it doesn't necessarily fill your soul in a very fulfilling way over time. But there's this interesting thing where I think for a lot of people, they're just sort of like, well, I could have kids, but then I'd have less time for all these other things, for my video games and my porn and my going out with friends and maybe things that are a little bit less easy to make fun of, like travel or whatever it might be. And there's a sort of a technological and social cultural aspect to this where we've given people the sort of paradox of choice where there are about a billion other things to do with your life, but I think people are waking up to the fact that almost none of them come even close to the fulfillment of creating another you of passing on your genetic code and raising a child.
Yeah, and the distinguishing feature of all of these is that they're part of what I think Helen Andrews calls limbic capitalism. It very much communicates with the lower brain regions. It's very it stimulates things that you might not even realize are stimulated at at the neocortex level. It's all about your most primal and most immediate desires, from food to, like you said, pornography, the Netflix 3 second, rolling into another episode mechanism. It's all very much created to keep you hooked in, and to keep you hooked in not necessarily because you want to. It's not negotiating with your rational
There will be a
capacity.
little voice in your head that's saying, stop, stop. I want to stop. And you'll be at 4 a.m. with the video games or the porn or whatever it is.
Exactly, and the things that are actually fulfilling, or in the long term, which might not even like make you happy, and in the sense of like a burger makes you happy. You're not going to get like that tickle of like, oh my god, I feel so good, but are rewarding in the long term, like you said, having a trade, mastering a craft or an instrument, or having a child, or forming a relationship that's really good, or even having a friend, which is, rarer and rarer at the moment, and keeping that relationship alive with everything you have. All of this stuff is, you can't see the reward immediately, and you maybe can't see it in half a year, and you maybe not even in a year. Maybe you have a child and then you get postpartum depression, and it's really shitty, and it really really is very different to a burger. It really is very different to porn. And if the only thing that you've been doing is, pew 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 and getting high and all this type of stuff, these things are getting harder and harder to do, and the payoff is getting harder and harder to see because not only, for example, with children, not only is it hard to see how you'll feel in 20 years when they're, going off to college or whatever thing you want to see as an accomplishment for your child. They're also, I don't know, depressingly, just essentially hard to predict. Every movement that is going to happen in this complex web of things that you put into motion is, you can't see it from the comfort of your own I don't know, gaming chair or wherever you are. So it's a tough one for people because it doesn't feel like there's enough reward to do these things. You might have like a biological imperative or a voice in your head saying, okay, it's time to have children, but in reality you probably want to continue having your life, and also you also maybe don't want to spend, what is it now, 250,000 over the lifetime of a child, which is extremely expensive. You could just spend it on I don't know, net subscription, SaaS, or whatever is cool right now, and spend $50 on Amazon, and it's you get that little kick of satisfaction rather than signing up for a lifetime of worries. And it does make sense why people might be thinking very hard about taking on that commitment or any commitment in general.
Yeah, and it's not just that these things are engaging and fun. I mean, obviously, video games, social media, porn, they're designed to be hyper engaging and immersive, but they give you this sense of accomplishment, and they are intentionally designed. Video games, social media, and porn, I think, are three of the most obvious examples where they are really designed to give you a sense of accomplishment. If you're watching pornography, the pornographer is trying to give you the sense, particularly if you're male, that you are having sex with all of these beautiful women and passing on your genes over and over again. If you're playing video games, you're ranking up, you're leveling up, you're getting better at the game, you're winning more matches, your win ratio is going up. You feel like you're building this skill, which maybe if you're a major league gamer might come in handy, you might make some money, but probably will not. And then with social media, I still remember when Facebook first became a thing for me. It was like 2010. I was 15 years old. And whenever I would see a little red one, I just remember those early dopamine hits. 15-year-old me was like, I'm getting attention. And maybe it was like a pretty girl from high school who's liking my post or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's a big thing on Facebook. Originally, a lot of it was seeing who's single and who's not, and posting statuses that you knew the pretty girl in your class was going to like. Maybe that has something to do with politics. Maybe it doesn't. I've started to read into some of the more feministy posts that my male colleagues make on Facebook. And I have thought about that a little bit, but needless to say, there's this false sense of accomplishment that I think people are wising up to a bit, but it sure does piss people off, especially when it comes to video games. That is a really interesting debate where I'm a gamer. I have a Zelda poster in my background here, but I've found that I have an awkward relationship with the gaming community because I just don't think it's healthy for somebody to play video games 10 hours a day. I don't. Past the age of like 20, I just don't think that's a great idea. I think it can be a great thing to do for an hour or two from time to time, or to do with friends, to do socially. And, they get that particular community is a passionate community and has been for a very long time. And boy, do they get pissed. And men are also very possessive of pornography. Although, and I would say for social media, I think it's more women. And this actually really leads into another topic I wanted to discuss with you, which is this comparison that I like to make between pornography and social media in terms of its impacts on men and women. If we can take the thesis that I think has generally been accepted, particularly as it pertains to pornography's effect on men, which is that it gives men this sort of unlimited and unearned access to these senses of sexual validation. Do you think it's possible that social media might be giving women, particularly young, attractive women who get an outsized amount of attention on social media, especially the visual ones, Instagram, Snapchat? Do you think it's possible that it gives women, especially young, attractive women, this sort of similarly unearned, unlimited, unfettered access to sort of social and emotional validation. And I think in some ways that ties into them being pulled away from other more sort of wholesome instincts, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I think that's almost incontrovertibly true. Um, you can see this in rates of just participation in social media, especially for younger girls, and also in the fallout that it's having in terms of mental health disorders and anxiety disorders and all of that stuff, which that cohort is affected mostly, and it overlaps very well with rates of usage of social media. So, yeah, young girls are very, very concerned about what other people think of them, and getting validation, especially for your looks, is yeah, it's some people live for that, and if you're a girl who maybe just turned like 13 or 14, the world really does change quite dramatically. And when I was 14, the world changed very dramatically for me, and there was no social media, or I wasn't definitely
Mm.
not on any. I don't know. There might have been some primitive form of social media somewhere, but I was not on it. And I can't even imagine what it would have felt like to not only have the immediate world of men change around you and in terms of how they relate to you, but also literally millions of people on the internet, reacting to your every selfie or whatever thing you decide to put out, which you can also see now with people, kind of the TikTok to OnlyFans funnel that apparently is quite active, which is, I mean, I understand, you go on TikTok, do a little dance there, you're a teen, and then everyone asks you in the comments like, oh, OnlyFans, where's your OnlyFans, where's your OnlyFans, and you're like, oh, okay, these people want to pay me money, I don't really have to do much. So it's, I don't know, it's an incredibly effective marketing funnel, especially in a place where how are you going to tell your daughter not to do that? It's something that people her age do. It's she's an individual. She makes her own choices. She's empowered. Man, I hate that word. She's she's finding her empowerment wherever it may lead her. All the girls in her class say it's cool, it's okay. Celebrities like, I don't know, Cardi B or whoever are on OnlyFans.
It's the
You know,
feminist thing to do too. I mean, if you're a father and you tell your daughter not to do that, you're being, a bad patriarchal male.
yeah, yeah, you're straight out of Footloose. You're just someone who's, yeah, completely archaic about the world, because you don't want your teenage daughter, I know, flogging nudes online. But yeah, yeah, that's the way of the world at the moment.
Yeah, it is really, really out of control, that thing with young women. And man, when I was in high school and college, I remember high school, Facebook started to become a big thing, Twitter to an extent. And then in college, Instagram, which is more visually focused, and it got a little weirder where I was like, man, there's a lot of bikini photos. Like that seems to be a very high percentage of the content on this particular social media app. There isn't a lot else going on. There's like puppies and bikinis, and that's kind of like that's got to be like half of Instagram is just those two things. And which again, those are quick dopamine releases, right? What's more of a quick dopamine release than puppies and bikinis? But in any case, TikTok even more so. I I I haven't gone on TikTok a ton. I actually have a TikTok now, and I've been posting short comedy videos there, so I find myself on it a little bit more. But I find TikTok to be super uncomfortable. TikTok, there is a funnel to OnlyFans. There's a lot of girls who are, when they get on TikTok, they're maybe 16 or 17, and the guys are saying OnlyFans, OnlyFans, OnlyFans in the comments. They turn 18, and then what do you know? You see their first comment that says like, I just turned 18, check out my OnlyFans. And, when these girls are 16 and 17, a lot of people think of it as, oh, they're just having fun. They're doing a little dance. I always phrase it this way. If you're a young girl who has begun to notice that she is sexually attractive to men, and this is something that it's a big deal for you, just like it's a big deal when men realize they're sexually attracted to women early on in their puberty days, and you're going and doing a dance on TikTok, there's an argument to be made that maybe you're just having a little bit of fun if you're doing a maybe slightly provocative dance with the hip movements or whatnot. But here's the thing that I always point out. For me, there's kind of a 1 out of 2 rule or a 2 out of 2 rule. If you're in a bikini on TikTok, maybe you're just hanging out by the pool. If you're dancing on TikTok, maybe you're just dancing. But if you're dancing in a bikini, which is pretty much a state of undress, the message that is probably being sent to your male viewers is something at least vaguely sexual. And this is something that you're not supposed to say. It's supposed to be these girls are just having fun. Well, they're dancing in their underwear, more or less. I mean, it's pretty obvious what that's about. And it's not good for men either, by the way, to be the way that it makes you think of your classmates is very weird. To have seen half of the girls in your class in their bikinis on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok is very weird, I must say. And I don't know how women are supposed to handle it in a world where they're being told that to be as sexual as possible, to basically do a striptease on TikTok when they're 17 years old or 16 years old, that this is empowering, as you said, that there's nothing bad that could possibly ever come of it. And anyone who tells them that is being a bad, sexist, mansplaining, whatever. Or if it's a woman, it's somebody who has internalized misogyny or what have you. I don't know how we fix this problem, because it is a very serious issue where, as you said, women's mental health problems are spiking. And also they're finding themselves in a position where they're almost acting like men. Like it's very bizarre. They have no sense of limitation on their sort of sexual portrayals. It's a very, very weird thing. I'm struggling a little bit because I'm thinking about how just like 10 years ago, it was very, very different. Like how much it's changed with social media, with kind of the feminist renaissance, this sort of fourth wave feminism. It's gotten to a point where there is seemingly is limitless messaging to women to be as sexual as possible in their, I mean, you would say sexual prime, but actually they're being encouraged at the age of like 14, like you said, to be doing these things. It's very weird. It's made me very uncomfortable, especially as the TikTok and OnlyFans thing, because those are relatively new. Those are only a few years old. It's really struck me. I guess for the first time ever, I'm looking at a generation that is slightly younger than me, because the Instagram and Facebook stuff was contemporaneous to my teenage years. This TikTok and OnlyFans stuff, I'm like, this was not there when I was younger. And this is completely insane to think about. I can't imagine if I was in high school and half the girls in my class had these bikini dance videos on TikTok. I mean, I would have been 15 years old. I would have went crazy.
Yeah, or like looming OnlyFans.
I know. Yeah. The idea. Yeah. I mean, it's like everybody, I mean, it's not a secret that boys want to see the captain, the cheerleading squad, in a nude. It's like, it's a weird thing where, and apparently that is one of the big appeals of OnlyFans is people talk about like found my old high school classmate on there. It's a weird way for us to interact, considering how puritanical we were not that long ago. And I don't know what's going to come of it. I mean, I guess it's just going to get even worse.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that, once, we've pulled out all the stops now for this, like you said, the fourth wave feminist renaissance where, everything's empowerment, but you still have quite, some last vestiges of puritanical ideas. Like, at the moment, you've got, age of consent is still a very relatively strict thing. I know some people in more leftward circles are kind of trying to look at it, reconsider it,
Yeah.
And I think from their perspective, it does make sense because, if you're dealing with this rational individual, like who's going to tell you that, why am I not rational at 17, but I am suddenly at 18? That's just, that's superstition. Maybe a child wants to be sexual. It could be, who are you to tell it that, it can't, all of these type of things. These are actually conversations going on in the background. And then you also have the quite puritanical and now all-encompassing idea of consent, which should cover any contingency related to any sort of sexual drama, anything related to porn, anything related to the
It's a Band-Aid you can slap on anything. It's like, well, there was consent, so we're all good.
Exactly, or you can retroactively insert it. Maybe years later, you reconsider. So it's quite a handy. It's like a multi-tool. The problem with it is that it's insufficient. It's necessary, obviously. I wouldn't necessarily say that people should, to start engaging in non-consensual things, but it doesn't cover the whole the whole spectrum of sexual type interactions between men and women, especially because a lot of them are very subtle, and they're tied into, you know, body language and pheromones and things that are not said and things that are said but are meant in a different way. And you know, there's a whole thing. It was called seduction back in the day. Now it's all kind of being subsumed under this mantle of consent and absolutely destroyed. You know, everyone's trying to, you know, run their sex life through a spreadsheet, and it's terrible, and you know, it's not sexy. And you kind of see this in the blossoming of kink culture, where a lot of like normal things where, you know, like, oh, I like it when the man is dominant, like, duh. This is, you know, this is just
It
being
is true.
a
Yeah.
woman. And it's like, now it's BDSM. Well, I don't know what to tell you. This used to be like normal guy girl stuff until like 5 minutes ago, and now you have to have a spreadsheet to run it through and make sure you get affirmative consent every time. And you know, and this kind of leads to a ratcheting up of these things as well, because if you need a spreadsheet and if you need to negotiate every part of it, you know, you might as well go on to like choking and, you know, slamming your head against the wall or some crazy thing, because it's like, you know, we need to step this up, because obviously, you know, it's not very sexy if you have to explicitly explain every part of it. So it's I feel like that's kind of like the basis of a lot of this, I don't know, new fascination with kinks, and you know, the idea that you shouldn't kink shame, which is, you know, it's a bit of thing. And there's also a weird overlap between, you know, normal things that, you know, just used to be normal until yesterday, and also a lot of stuff that maybe we should kink shame, like, I don't know, bestiality or things like that, which are quite trendy in certain circles. Yeah, no, we maybe should think about that a little bit more. Yeah, but it's a wild world out there, and I think a lot of it is motivated by the fact that we've just forgotten how to relate to each other in the classical ways, you know, which we had some ideas about that. We had some traditions or some lore about how men are, how women are, that wasn't just invented by the patriarchy or inserted by some nefarious actors. It was just we've kind of learned how to deal with each other, and it was part of culture. Now we've just nuked all of that, and now we have to reinvent stuff from first principles. First principles, which are not very good principles, you know, like the idea that we're the same, we're individuals, everything's mediated by consent. No, it isn't. No, we aren't. That's that's it.
Well, and we see the contradictory nature of all of these ideas and how inherently confusing they are in this new kind of land of confusion that is the modern dating landscape. I mean, on one hand, you have teenagers being encouraged to be as sexual as possible and to be sexually liberated. And with adults, you kind of have this duality where, or this contradiction where, on one hand, sexual and flirtatious interactions are sterilized and sort of just brought down to this incredibly weird scripted nature where it's like men aren't supposed to approach women unless they have this sort of expressed consent, except that men are often supposed to read into very subtle signs. Then you end up with kind of that Aziz Ansari situation where he was supposed to read this woman's mind while she was filleting him and think that she doesn't want to do anything else, even though she didn't necessarily make that very clear. And it's just like, there's that aspect of it where, or even, and then there's the idea of like sex contracts. It's like, I consent, literally a consent form for sexual consent. And it's like, this is all strikes me as sterilizing and boring, and no one could ever possibly want to have sex in this way. And then yet it does seem like once you get past those points, then you're encouraged to just like go nuts, like do the dirtiest, most disgusting thing you can think of. And it's like, what is that? Like, these seems like two inherently contradictory
Yeah.
ideas. You're being told this is the most fun, incredible, over the top thing you could possibly do and go nuts with it, but make sure you've signed a contract and that you don't, like, you know, go in for a kiss without asking. It's very, the
Yeah.
contradictions are very clear.
Yeah, the issue there is that, you know, after the 60s sexual revolution, after the pill, um, people tried to, I don't know, convince women, or women tried to convince themselves as well, that they are men sexually. You know, they want to have sex like men. They're just, you know, the sexual default is just, you know, going out there, as I said, kicking ass and taking names, you know, being, I don't know, the Sex and the City ideal. The thing is, women typically don't fare well having sex like men. And then stuff like this comes in because things go wrong. If the man expects you to have sex like a man, if you expect yourself to have sex like a man, things get out of hand in weird ways. You get hurt. You get hurt. Physically, mentally, in various ways. And then I think a lot of the consent and the explicit consent ideas are kind of a knee-jerk reaction to try to compensate for the fact that this is not how we're supposed to be relating. This is it's trying to protect women from this new ideal that they're striving towards. They're trying to be, I don't know, the Wolf of Wall Street, or I don't know, Casanova, and they're just Jenny from accounting, and this discrepancy is trying to be compensated through even all of these new authorities that pop up in colleges, where it's like, oh, you need to bring in the administrators to protect women from, I don't know, what is it, rape culture or things like that, which are just really probably awkward and uncomfortable, and maybe sometimes quite, rapey encounters that women, the culture is you go to one of these parties, you get knockout drunk, you have all sorts of, experiences that are more or less wanted or not wanted, or maybe you like the person, but, and that guy probably, understands that, this is hookup culture. We're just gonna do whatever, it's fine, everything's fine, and then the next day you're like, oh my god, this wasn't a good idea, and then you bring in the administrators, and it's all very much burdened with the fact that no one knows how to deal with each other, because back in the day, I always harken back to the day before the 1960s, the norm was you're not going to have sex with a guy, probably not before marriage, not sex was the default. Now, yes, sex is the default, and we're all the same, and we all want sex the same, and with the same intensity and the same styles, and it's all very much downstream from porn as well, which is quite an assertive way to engage in the act, and it's very much male focused in the way it's kind of perceived. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird place to be as a woman, because in a way you want the validation. You're like, yes, he likes me, I'm just going to do this. And then, the fallout is quite significant as well, because that's just not the way we're supposed to be engaging with each other.
No, and it wasn't that long ago that the idea you were discussing, which is that, women don't necessarily want sex as much, or at least in the same way that men do, that was actually communicated relatively clearly by society until like maybe 10 years ago. I remember that the portrayal was generally in pop culture that like women like to have sex with men that they like more or less the person who kind of really wants the sex is the man. The woman is kind of a gatekeeper. If she really, really likes a guy, she might have sex with him. And that, there was kind of a cat and mouse game that comes from that. There were a lot of movies starring Jesse Eisenberg and Michael Cera about like, I want to lose my virginity before high school or before college or whatever it might be. And yeah, a lot of those were goofy and maybe not entirely accurate, but they did get across this basic message that guys kind of want sex more, or at least in a different way than women do. And then there was this big shift to kind of like girl boss, no more slut shaming, no more anything like that. Have as much sex as you can, be as sexually liberated as you can. And it just flies in the face of, thousands of years of evolution and biology. Because what you were saying about how women don't want the same things as men necessarily sexually, and that encouraging them to be men might not be the best idea sexually. It is actually based in science. I mean, women over thousands of years learned that a single man who sticks with them and actually raises the offspring will increase the survival odds of their offspring. And we know that has sort of extended into the modern day, where fatherlessness is one of the number one predictors of a premature death due to some kind of homicide situation, or just not graduating from high school, drug addiction, having an abusive, just having an all around miserable situation. And so, it flies in the face of science.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, again, the rejection of nature, the party of science always, is very, picks and chooses which parts of science are actually relevant. And yeah, I think especially in the relationship between men and women, the drift away from essentially things that we knew were, like I said, we know were true until yesterday, and also this focus on the idea that okay, now we're going to bring in social science, and you have these studies that I don't know, unreplicable, like 23 people participate in the study. They're all students. They're all from Pennsylvania. And then a lot of the times when you discuss, the relationship between men and women, what we knew until yesterday is, literally, recorded in all of history and literature. And we knew that this is how men and women are. And now someone shows up and says, oh, actually, there was this study conducted and it says that actually men and women, women are much hornier than men. There's a study from the Netherlands. Actually, that's typically you want to avoid bringing in, all kind of weird social science stuff. And I think, there's something to be said about the lying eyes school of gender relations, and also kind of, interacting with the world outside, talking to people, empirical research on yourself and in your life, and just, maybe relying on in a way, kind of traditional tropes about men and women, which, the stereotypes, but one thing that's replicable in science is the accuracy of stereotypes. That there's quite extensive literature on that. So, if you want to, if you really want to be scientific about it, it's probably one place you can start digging. It's quite depressing, especially how it's been weaponized, for political aim. Because a lot of the people who actually are doing these studies are not non-political agents. They have something to prove. They're going to do enough p hacking or tweak their data enough to get to the result that they want. They're going to publish it. Everyone's going to cite it because unreplicable studies are cited, almost exponentially more than the ones that actually replicate, because they have, exotic results that people really want to spread. Mm-hmm. So it's I don't know. I don't see the future of social science with very good eyes or good intentions from now on.
Yeah, and it does seem like there's this concerted effort to push out these studies to get this propaganda out there. Where do you think exactly this all comes from? Like, would you say that there's a particular ideology or faction or party or movement that is sort of pushing for this? Because I always wonder, it seems so organized. It seems like we're getting this in a somewhat organized, intentional fashion. I mean, do you call it feminism? Do you call it critical theory? Do you call it what does Jordan Peterson say? Postmodern neo-Marxism. What is the source of all of this not very accurate information that is pushed on us constantly? I mean, it's propaganda.
Yeah, I think it's essentially kind of like this game theoretical ratcheting up of who participates in these spaces, because essentially if you have this mindset, and it could be much broader than these, because these are kind of phenomena of the 21st century, the 20th century, Marxism, postmodernism, things like that. But if you have people who are committed to the ideal of the individual, this person who's like a rational agent, and you could subsume people from like the new atheist movement under here, and essentially almost all philosophical currents of the 20th century had some idea of, okay, we are rational agents, we make individual choices, and we orient ourselves towards a future where through science and the capacity of humans to reason, we're going to get to a much better place, and we're on the path to progress. And this is essentially the only basic assumption you need to make to be this kind of to be on the path to participate in this. And if you're this kind of rationalist progressive, the counterweight, the people who are trying to drag you down in a way, the traditionalists, the conservatives, they have a very hard, they face very stiff competition in these institutions, because you kind of have this continuously searching, entropic force that's raising everything in its path to progress, and it's going to kind of whittle down any resistance that it has in these institutions, and that's what you've seen. There are 1 in 5 conservative professors, like in the 70s, I think, or in the 80s, and now, it's 1 in 20 in
Yeah.
almost any situation. So yeah, it kind of has a logic of its own. So I don't know. I don't think it needs to be very ideological. It just needs to be okay. We want more freedom. We want to, emancipate people from the constraints of, unchosen bonds like tradition, like the body. You see this in all these transhumanist, transgender movements. It's like, this is a meat prison. It's a video game skin. You can change it. You can, it doesn't represent you. Who you are is this, rational agent behind the eyes that's just pulling the strings and creating its own reality. So yeah, it's you see this in singularity worship and uploading your consciousness into the I don't know, Skynet or whatever the thing is that we should aspire to. AI, some currents of AI. The idea that AI is just the next stage of evolution, of kind of post-human consciousness. So there are many directions in which this idea, because it's essentially an idea that it's kind of like Gnosticism, the idea that the body is just a kind of a fallen thing, and the actual thing is the soul that dualism that it will transcend somehow.
Yeah, and the individualistic aspect of this is so fascinating because there are collectivist aspects to it as well, and they appear almost simultaneously. You mentioned the transgender thing, which has really blown up in the past 10 years, and it's so fascinating to me because of the way that it basically tells you not to try and negotiate your self-image with the image that is sort of projected by society onto you at all, to basically say, fuck what society says completely. I actually get to choose my own gender. This is like the ultimate individualism. I get to change my biology by sheer power of will in my brain. Like I get to feel like a woman and thus be a woman, even if I am biologically male or vice versa. And there's something very individualistic about that. And I mean, kind of on its face ridiculous about that and anti-science about that, but also there's a collectivist aspect that comes in how it is spread and how it is pushed, which is then if you don't agree with that on an ideological level, you're put in this out group, and then there's the in group. Like you're not even allowed, I think, on Twitter to basically be against transgender ideology anymore. At least you're not supposed to explicitly say that a trans woman is actually biologically male or what have you. I mean, Megan Murphy was kicked off of Twitter for this. And it is the transgender thing in particular has really struck me as the ultimate expression of this extreme individualism where you are the sole arbiter of even your biology, which is just insane to think. And then yet the way that it is spread and pushed through society kind of has this collectivist aspect to it, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk of this distinction between collectivists and individualists, and kind of the anti-woke circles, and some people are like, okay, individualism is what we want, collectivism is what we don't want. Yeah, I don't know if this distinction is that important in this case, because essentially what these people, I mean, these people, the the transgender movement's trying to do is to assert an identity that is only real in the eyes of other people. It's like it only is complete if you accept it, because it's a performative thing, which is, some people say it's, tied into fetishes. There's the work of Ray Blanchard, which is quite interesting on autogynephilia. It's one of those things that it really isn't a full expression of, the blossoming individual until it ropes you in to participate in the act, which is, this is kind of the next level of individualism, where, you become part of the kaleidoscope of ways in which I have, of attributes that I've added to my I don't know, portfolio of individualism. So it's, I don't know, I feel like this could be a breaking point, because people, obviously if you're coerced to participate, and people are going to start to wake up a little bit more about what actually is happening. It could be a breaking point also because there's a lot of children involved, and the fallout of all this chemical castration, which is hard to describe it in any other way, is quite horrendous for a lot of people. And I think information is coming out of what it means to have bottom surgery, or even top surgery, all sorts of terrible things that are going on. These are not simple procedures. They chain you to expensive and excruciating treatments for the rest of your life. So there's a lot of information coming out of this, and I think it's it's a hopeful direction in a gruesome way, because we're doing like Dr. Mengele level experiments on children now in the name of virtue, which it's it's absolutely horrible, and I think it's also the ultimate expression of this idea that you're the creator of your own reality, which is unfortunately not true.
Yeah, and and this result that we're facing now, where it's kind of come to a head and people are maybe starting to wake up to its consequences a little bit, was so inevitable. Because when you have this extreme individualism where you are the ultimate arbiter of your own personal truth, and that is projected onto the world as an absolute truth, and there's no negotiation process, the inevitable result is that you have 7 or 8 billion different versions of reality that aren't negotiated or sifted at all, or agreed upon in any way, or it makes cooperation impossible. It makes society impossible. You cannot have a society where there are not agreed upon truths. And one of the most basic of agreed upon truths is what a man is and what a woman is. I mean, one thing that strikes me as so odd about this issue in particular is how it is downplayed by a certain cohort of, particularly in the United States, Democrats. I'm sure left wingers all across the world, but Democrats in the United States, some in my family and friends, when I bring up this issue, they say, why are you so interested in this? Why are you so obsessed with it? This is a culture war issue. Why, this isn't, let's talk about economics, or let's talk about the environment. And I'm like, those things are also important. This is about our basic notion of what reality is. And if I had explained this to you just 10 years ago, you would have agreed with me. Something changed for you. And I know that because I know these people. Some of these people are, in their 50s and 60s. And when they were in their 40s, they didn't believe this stuff. I mean, they were full-fledged adults. They weren't little kids when they believe something different. And it frustrates me greatly that people don't understand the significance of this issue. That's perhaps the most annoying thing to me about this issue, is how it is often put into the bucket of, oh, this is just conservative, culture warring to try and get votes or whatever it might be. And it's like, this is about how we have a society. I mean, because it's one of the first issues that's come up in recent times, or it's one of the most blatant examples of an issue where we are being asked to deny reality in a way that has endless consequences. I mean, the pronoun thing being one of the most obvious is, how the hell are we even going to talk about people?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's getting a foot in the door and giving, it's like in sales, you just need one concession. You need the person to say yes once, and then your sales on its way. And it is a blatant lie, obviously, and it is kind of extremely it's important within the context of what we're going through right now, but at the same time it's also just a precursor of what's going to come. And if we don't cut off the absurdity at this point, then I don't even want to know what's coming down the pike, because this is this is, like you said, these are probably the most basic fundamental biological categories, and they offer orientation in society, and they have huge coordination value, and I think it's quite scary to think about what might come next. So I'm really keen to see people fighting this on every front, and I think especially in the UK it started, and I think they're starting to make quite a lot of headway with actual lawsuits, with actual cases of people who have been hurt by these clinics, where the idea that you just need to affirm the child's wishes and pump them full of whatever hormones they want from a menu is what has to be done. So the backlash is here. I hope it's enough to kind of steer the course a bit.
Yeah. I agree. It's a much bigger issue than so many people want to admit. They try to just kind of brush it under the rug, but if things aren't slowed down or reversed on this issue, then as you were kind of implying, it is difficult to imagine the horror that awaits. I mean, we've already seen horrific things, especially in what's being done to children, but it has been nice to see some of the progress that's been made in the UK in sort of having a more honest debate about this. And hopefully we begin to see that in the States and elsewhere in the West as well. But Alex, I know we're approaching our hour. Thank you so much for being with me. This was a great conversation. I'm very excited to get this out. Before we go, I wanted to ask if there's anything you want to plug and promote. I know you've got a podcast, you've got a Substack. Let people know where they can find you on social media and anything you'd like them to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at Kaschuta on Twitter. That's just my last name, and that's probably where I am until they kick me out for transgender stuff. I'm sure.
Well, they Megan Murphy you.
Till they Megan Murphy me. I think my strategy has been I don't really attack people. I don't talk about other people. I
Yeah,
just talk about ideas. It does
it's a good
help, you know.
strategy. Yeah.
Haven't gotten nuked yet. And I also have my Substack where I post my writing and my the early releases of my podcast Subversive. And then I also have a Patreon for my podcast Subversive, and you can find it. You know, I put out every episode, but I just do early releases on my Patreon if people are interested in that. And yeah, it's all over the internet. It's on YouTube and every podcast platform. So it's Subversive with Alex Kaschuta. And that's about it. That's all I have to plug.
All right. Thanks very much, Alex. Everybody check out Alex's podcast. I've really enjoyed your podcast, Subversive. It's very interesting. And then check out some of our other stuff as well. Thanks for being on the show today, Alex. If you're listening to the show on YouTube, please give us a like, give us a little bit of a comment. Let us know what you thought about today's episode. If you're listening on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review. That really helps get the podcast out there. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Veritas podcast.